Well, it's time to try to put some decals on. I've trimmed these decals pretty close to the ink. So hopefully the real thick film won't be too visible. I'm going to be using microset and microsol. I'll put a little microset down and apply the decal over the top of it. I'll use a brush to put it on. It's right down towards the bottom of the spaced armor. I'll put it right there. Try to float this into position. Looks pretty good. Try to pull that liquid away. That liquid out from underneath the decal. All right. Have those two on. And I'll move to the other side. I have the decals on. And I use microset to put the decals in place. I would wet the surface, slide the decals on, and then having the surface wet with microset, I'd slide the decals around where I wanted them. Then I used a little piece of paper towel and just blotted off the excess. And now that they've set for a couple minutes, I'm going to use microsol, and that'll soften the decals and get them to stick really tight to the surface. And with these thick decals, it might help a little bit as far as making them cling to the surface tightly, and maybe the thick film won't be as evident. Now, I don't want to get them too wet because then they'll float again, so I definitely don't want that. And the 521 on the back, I cut the 521 out, and that was a bit of a challenge to get it on the armor here, the schurzen, because the numbers are pretty flimsy, and I was lucky not to tear them. So I got a little bubble right there. Try to get that out. And I'll let that solution sit there. And I may have some tide marks after this, but I found that just taking a brush with some water, I can usually get that off. But I feel like this step, especially with the microsol, is pretty much mandatory when you're applying decals. The microset, I've not used that at times on some projects, and I just use water to get the surface wet, and it worked fine. Let me get this out of the way. And hopefully I got that rear cross in the right position. Without the muffler in place, it's a little bit difficult to tell. And the instruction manual with the color 5 views, they're pretty small, and so it's hard for me to see. All right, and we got one more marking in the front. And you can kind of see how thick these decals are. So hopefully this will help a little bit. Painting the road wheels and return rollers, painting the rubber. I use MIG rubber and tires. Put a drop in my palette. And I have a little bit of this Media airbrush cleaner I use to thin the paint. And this is time consuming. This can take me a couple hours. So I paint one side of the road wheel, let it dry, flip it over, paint the other side, let it dry, and then I got to paint this side. So I do it in 3 steps. Takes a little bit of time. There's a bunch of them. Thankfully, it's not a Panzer IV. It would give me 4 extra wheels to do. But it takes a little patience. Just kind of get in the groove and get her done. Well, I'm at the point where I need to do some chipping. And other than that, I'm just about ready for clear coat. So I painted the end of the barrel black. I have the machine gun painted. The decals are on the turret. And as I showed earlier, I had to trim the decals close because they're pretty thick. Got the machine gun painted. I have the S-hooks and the pry bar painted. I have the fire extinguisher painted. I did not paint the jack. What I'm going to do is I'm going to chip the jack, but I'm going to leave the jack in Dunkelgelb. I have the tow cables painted. I have the rear decals on. And I have the shovel painted. And this will get some additional detailing, once we get on the home stretch. But the wood handle, the metal shovel blade, have the axe head and handle painted. Got the engine starter crank painted. Got the wire cutters painted. All right. Got the road wheels painted. Both sides. Return rollers painted. Got the jacking block painted. Again, it's going to get some additional detail once we get to that point. Antennas painted. Now the muffler, I'm going to try something with the muffler. Now I have it gray and I have it rusted, dark rust. I'm going to clear it. I'm going to put some chipping fluid on it. And I'm going to paint parts of it Dunkelgelb. And then I'm going to take a brush and brush off the areas where I don't want the paint. And where I'll leave the Dunkelgelb paint is the areas furthest away from the pipes. So I'm thinking that the pipes directly coming out of the engine exhaust would be the hottest. And then as it gets closer to the output of the muffler, it would be cool enough where it's not going to burn all the paint off. And a muffler, with exhaust, the heat, the cold, condenses in the bottom of the muffler, so the bottom of the muffler is going to be a little bit rusty. So it's going to be something I'm going to try. I'm going to clear it. I'm going to spray some Dunkelgelb on it, and then I'm going to try to remove portions of the Dunkelgelb using the hairspray or chipping fluid technique. And then after that, I'll finish it with some rust. But I'm going to try that. I've never tried that before, so I want to try that. So overall, I'm to the point where I need to chip the model. And then after that, it'll be clear coated. I've already chipped the green, and now I'm chipping the edges of the yellow. So I'm using a dark rust color, and I'm still using this 2-0 brush, although the tip is not ideal for this because it's starting to roll over. So I have to be careful with it. And this is all touch. And again, like any of these weathering steps or detailing steps, you want to make it random, but random's difficult to do, so you do the best you can. And I can't get the paint too thin or it's translucent. So the paint has to be a little bit heavy, a little bit thick. course, the edges would always be the place where the paint is likely to chip first. And a couple of those spots were mistakes, but you just try to make your mistakes work for you. This technique requires a little bit of touch, but it's not difficult. You know, as I say that, I botch it up, but and once I get my spaced armor here chipped, I'm going to switch to a better brush to do the turret, because this brush is really seeing the end of its usefulness for something like this. That'll do that one. That's really it. That's all there is to it. Just kind of really light touch, get a little bit of paint, make sure the paint is thick enough so that when you dab it onto your part, it's opaque. And then, you know, just a little bit of practice. Well, I have the detail painting done for the tools. I have the decals on. I have the chipping done. I have a little bit of work done on this muffler. And I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to paint part of it in the Decals, and then do some chipping. Kind of have an idea of something I want to do with that, so I'm going to try that. Jacking block's been painted, at least initially. It'll get a clear coat, and then I'll get a wash to try to bring the wood grain out. The spaced armor for the left side, it's been chipped. And it's got to put some scratches in it. Tools have been painted. Jack is chipped. I left the jack in Decals. Decals are on. And the chipping on the turret is very subtle. The chipping on the hull is a little more pronounced. Here you can see the tools on the left side, right side have been painted. And just very little chipping on the turret. Just a tiny bit in the cupola. Tiny bit back here by the stowage bin. And the initial colors for the wood have been put on. Once the model's been cleared, then I'll add the wood grain. And the antenna's painted. I have the side armor for the right side chipped, and I added some scratches. So I'm at the point now where I need to clear coat the model. And once that's done, I start the weathering. I haven't done anything with the tracks yet other than prime them. And I don't have the return rollers on because they fall off. A little bit of chipping on the wheels. A little bit on the idler. Overall, it's not chipped too heavily. A little bit on the hull. And I had to trim the decals because the decal film is pretty thick. So I had to trim the decals in order to try to hide the thickness of the decals. So they're all trimmed back to the ink. But overall, it's coming along and starting to enter the final stages here with the clear coat and then the weathering. Well, thank you for watching. Starting to enter the home stretch with this model. I haven't even begun the display base yet, so I still have that to do. I hope you would join me as we finish this model up.